In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the big Chinese hack. A Bloomberg investigation reveals hackers implanted tiny microchips in servers that infiltrated data centers of almost 30 U.S. companies, including Apple and Amazon. Plus, new rules for testing self-driving cars are out. The big takeaway, drivers no longer need to be human. We will get reaction from the Hill. And Medium is publishing its first novel, a satire of Silicon Valley written by a former Google exec. But is truth just as absurd and shocking as fiction? Author Jessica Powell joins us later in the show. First to our top story, it is the most significant known supply chain attack ever on U.S. companies. A Bloomberg Businessweek investigation revealed Chinese hackers implanted tiny microchips in servers that infiltrated the data centers of almost 30 U.S. companies, including Apple and Amazon. This based on extensive interviews conducted with intelligence and corporate sources. Both Apple and Amazon have disputed summaries of Bloomberg Businessweek's reporting. So has Supermicro, the company that assembled the servers, and the Chinese government has responded, calling itself a, quote, resolute defender of cybersecurity, but also not directly addressing the allegations. The story and the latest issue of Bloomberg Businessweek hit stands Friday. Joining us now from Washington, one of the authors of this exclusive story, Bloomberg Tech's Jordan Robertson, and from Santa Clara, California, we have Steve Grobin, the Chief Technology Officer of cybersecurity company McAfee. Jordan, I want to talk to you first. Talk to us about the extent of your reporting. You spoke to 17 unnamed sources in this report and what you found.
Sure. Yeah, we talked to, as you say, we cite 17 different sources in the story. Now, these are senior-level officials across the government and also senior-level individuals inside the affected companies, AWS and Apple. This is a constellation of sources that is robust and it's broad, and it's a pretty comprehensive look at what happened in this attack. And you know what happened here is that the Chinese government, according to our reporting, installed malicious microchips on Supermicro assembled server motherboards. And what a malicious microchip is, think about it as an infection that is hard-coded into your computer. You cannot get rid of it without throwing the machine away. It's a very, very powerful attack. Very few countries would have this capability. And what has really alarmed U.S. officials was that China's control over the manufacture of computer equipment, computer hardware, makes this something that is possible.
Steve, you've had a lot of oversight over the supply chain over the years. What do you make of this?
So one of the things that we recognize is a hardware-based implant would be one of the most powerful ways for a nation state to spy on a data center infrastructure. What's ultimately required is there's a chain of trust. So applications need to trust the underlying operating system or cloud software, and then that software has to trust the underlying hardware. So if you're able to tamper with the hardware, you're essentially able to have access to all of the other things that sit on top of it and would provide tremendous insight and data to an adversary.
Now, given the seriousness of this, I do want to read the response of the companies in full. Amazon saying it is untrue that AWS knew about a supply chain compromise and issue with malicious chips or hardware modifications when acquiring Elemental. This is the company, Jordan, that you report was basically the source of these chips. Apple saying, on this we can be very clear, Apple has never found malicious chips, hardware manipulations, or vulnerabilities purposely planted in any server. And Supermicro saying we remain unaware of any such investigation. Meantime, you have the Chinese government not directly addressing questions about manipulation of Supermicro servers, issuing a statement that read in part, supply chain safety in cyberspace is an issue of common concern. China is also a victim. Jordan, what is your response to these companies pushing back so hard?
Sure. Yeah. Our response to it is actually that the story speaks for itself. The constellation of sources that we've gathered for this story, again, encompasses senior level officials across the government, including senior individuals inside both named affected companies. I can't speculate. It's not my position to speculate on why these companies might deny these allegations. And I also wanted to clarify a comment I made earlier on Bloomberg Television, where I did speculate on why these companies might deny this reporting. That's not really my place. But what I can say is, the sourcing is broad and robust. Multiple levels of corroboration between individuals and companies and the government, and that the story included the company's denials in full, which is our typical policy, for transparency purposes.
Now, the extent of the data that may or may not have been collected is unclear. But Steve, talk to us about how difficult it would be to even determine that, given that this is a hardware hack, not a software hack.
Right. One of the challenges with hardware is they're really what we call black boxes, meaning they perform a very specific function, but the underlying implementation of how they work is often only known by the designer. But what makes this even more challenging in today's world is the way modern semiconductors and platforms are built is there's massive requirements for sub-suppliers to supply many of the underlying technologies. So chip makers license what we call IP blocks, things that could either create a artificial intelligence part of the chip or a graphics part of the chip to do some very specific functions. And even the designer of the chip itself may not have full visibility as to how all of the underlying components work. And what that means is that if there's any sort of weakness in the supply chain, or what I would call the design chain, meaning how those components were designed, it is possible for an adversary to implant logic that would allow this type of spying to occur.
Jordan, what is the U.S. government telling us here? Because you report that there is still an investigation into this issue that is currently open.
The U.S. government's in a very tricky position. When we started reporting this story, we thought for sure there must have been some sort of private alert that went out. There must have been some mechanism for the government to alert people to this attack. And what we discovered was the U.S. government was in a very tricky position, because if they announced the breach, this is that could potentially damage a U.S. company. And also, this is a U.S. company, and that they, this was a problem with no solution. That was what we walked away from, many conversations with individuals which was, what do we tell people if we announce this? What do we say to people? And the answer that I have is Apple and Amazon, according to our reporting, found these chips. You're not supposed to find these chips. They were doing a level of analysis that most companies don't do. So I think in many ways, they could be a model. This approach could be a model for other companies. You have to think of hardware as another way that your data centers could get compromised, and many companies just don't look at it.
Steve, does this story make you think, well, if this happened, what else is out there?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is what are all of the different ways an adversary could tamper with the supply chain. Even things like intentionally introducing defects into open source software components that would then be implemented into products across the industry. One of the ways to think of this is we're challenged already in cybersecurity by vulnerabilities that were accidentally introduced into products. If there was an adversary whose goal was to intentionally place a vulnerability such that it could be exploited by them for a long period of time before it was ever found out, that would be an extremely effective technique. And I think if we look at this case, the fact that this was focused on a hardware component in the baseboard management controller portion of the hardware, that's really a portion of the hardware that's all about making it easier to support machines that are in data centers, because we know that we can no longer have humans crawling through data centers to do all sorts of repair. And that means that that type of hardware has immense privilege and power. So although we haven't done forensics on this specific case, it is a very plausible type of scenario that we have a lot of concern about.
Jordan, we heard the vice president shaking aim at China in a speech earlier. We've also are in the middle of a trade war between the United States and China. What do you expect the fallout from this is going to be? I mean, the question really is, what now?
It's hard to know. As we note in the story, our original information, our original tip about this came, when the Obama administration was still in power. And, what that signals to me is that both administrations were deeply concerned, about the security of the supply chain and China. And, it's hard to tell it's impossible to predict what the administration will do. But what I will say is this, is that, one of the lessons that we took away from this reporting very strongly was you're not going to find hardware problems and hardware manipulations if you're not looking for them. Amazon and Apple, again, were looking for these things, and they found them. The vast majority of companies wouldn't. So would it make sense to take all manufacturing of motherboards back to the U.S.? I think a more practical approach for most companies is going to be implementing some form of hardware analysis and hardware inspection as part of their normal security practices.
All right. Bloomberg's Jordan Robertson there, and McAfee's Steve Grobman, thanks so much for joining us. We should note Bloomberg LP has been a Supermicro customer, but has found no evidence to suggest that Bloomberg has been affected by the hardware issues raised in this article. This is Bloomberg. The Trump administration has released its guidelines for testing autonomous vehicles. And one big takeaway is that drivers no longer need to be human. The Transportation Department's Automated Vehicles 3.0 guidance will no longer assume that a commercial vehicle driver is human. Basically, an initial step to allow trucks to travel across state lines piloted by an autonomous driving system. The document asserts that the Department of Transportation already has the authority to set safety standards that allow for innovative automated vehicle designs like cars without steering wheels or pedals. To talk about this, I want to bring in Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, who last year introduced bipartisan legislation to advance the development of self-driving cars. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, what do you like and what don't you like about these new guidelines?
Well, I think the guidelines are pretty clear that we have to make sure that we have a framework to allow this technology to continue to move forward. Existing vehicle safety laws don't allow an automobile without a steering wheel or without brake pedals, for example. Yet these new technologies, which will be piloted by advanced machine learning and AI systems, will be literally piloted by machines, and we've got to make sure we have that framework.
That said, the administration is saying the DOT is the one that has the authority here, that Congress doesn't need to step in to manage emerging technologies. Why do you disagree with that?
Well, I think we want to do this fairly quickly. I guess it depends on how quick the Department of Transportation will actually move forward on this. Our AV Start Act gives flexibility to manufacturers as long as they're actually certifying that they do have indeed safe vehicles and that they're dealing with things like cyber security. But this technology is moving very, very rapidly. We want to make sure that automakers have an idea of what that framework is. I mean, you're looking at some of them that will be putting out level 4 cars, perhaps as early as next year in commercial operations. And we're looking at our international competitors. Folks in Europe and in Asia are moving full speed ahead on this. We don't want to lag behind, and certainly it's been my experience that when you have a bureaucratic organization involved in it, it doesn't move all that quickly. So however we get there safely and efficiently, quicker, is going to be better for our international competitive position.
So in your view, what should Congress have oversight of or input in?
Well, this is our AV Start Act basically creates that framework. It allows companies to have exemptions to current regulations that are in place right now, but also ask the federal agencies to move quicker with coming up with a framework. But in the meantime, they can put these cars out on the road, provided there's validation as to their safety, and not just physical safety and operating on the road, but cybersecurity as well.
Given that you want speed here, do you foresee passing the legislation that you introduced anytime soon?
Well, we're hoping that it will. It's passed through the House. Now our version of the Senate passed unanimously out of committee. We are working with a variety of stakeholders really related to this issue. We're very close, hopefully, to coming to an agreement and can get it moving forward. So we understand the importance of this. We're understanding that we would like to have this done by the end of the year. And this is being done on a bipartisan basis. I'm working closely with Senator Thune, who's the chair of the Commerce Committee. He's been very focused on this as well. And we're hoping we can get this moving quickly.
Do you have any sense of whether senators in your own party, whether it's Senator Schumer or Senator Feinstein, will come to your side?
Well, that's why we are working with everybody to make sure we have language that people are comfortable with. We understand that we need to have a consensus of folks who believe that this is the right way to go. As I mentioned, it did pass unanimously in a bipartisan way out of the Senate Commerce Committee, so it enjoys very broad bipartisan support. We just have a little ways further to go before it gets out on the floor or is attached to some other vehicle that may be moving here in the Senate.
What is your biggest concern when it comes to the safety of self-driving cars?
Well, obviously the technology has to be tested, and there needs to be really a comfort factor that this technology will indeed allow these automobiles to move through what could be a very complex environment if you're in a city. But part of that testing requires these vehicles to get out on the road. In fact, it has been described to me that basically about a few hours on a public highway is equal to weeks of testing on a test track. And in order to make sure that these vehicles are safe, you do need to get them out on the roads. And I think the important thing to remember is that we believe that we can eliminate most accidents in this country. 95% of all accidents are human error. 40,000 people, nearly 40,000 people die on our highways every year. Hundreds of thousands are injured. The quicker this technology is developed, the more lives that will be saved.
You traveled to South Korea and saw the competition we face in self-driving cars. Do you believe the U.S. is at risk of falling behind?
There's no question other places in the world are working very aggressively to bring these vehicles to market. I was with Hyundai. They have a very advanced vehicle that I had the opportunity to ride in. They're expecting to be able to commercialize that as well on a fairly quick timeline. I know the Chinese are investing billions of dollars in this technology, the same with European companies. And there's certainly a belief whoever comes to the market early will be at a competitive advantage versus all of the other competitors. And I want to make sure those are American manufacturers, that this technology is in the United States, that we are the leader. We have traditionally been a leader in the automotive sector. We need to continue to be that leader.
Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. Coming up, the network for freelancers, Upwork, goes public. Can it keep up with the likes of LinkedIn? We'll hear from the CEO next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. The world's largest freelancing network, Upwork, has raised $187 million in its initial public offering. The platform, which connects freelancers with clients, was formed through the merger of competing companies, Elance and Odesk, in 2014. Now it boasts 375,000 freelancers working for almost 500,000 clients. Bloomberg's Alex Barinka caught up with CEO Stefan Kasriel to talk about the IPO.
The specific segment of the freelance economy that we serve, people that tend to be highly skilled. 80% of the users on Upwork have a college degree, 34% have a postgraduate degree. So these are people that are truly doing this by choice. If they wanted a traditional W-2 job, they could easily get one. What they're getting through Upwork is they get more freedom. They choose to be their own boss. More flexibility. They can work from anywhere. They can work on the schedule that they choose. They essentially choose their clients. And on top of that, they typically make significantly more money than they would make through the local job market. So what we hear from freelancers time and time again is they would much rather take a higher pay and then choose their own benefits, as an example, than what would happen through a traditional employer. 50% of the freelancers, when we survey them, we ask a question, which is, how much money would a traditional employer have to pay you to convince you to take a full-time job with them? And literally 50% of the respondents will say no amount of money. So this is really something people do by choice as opposed to doing it by necessity.
So where does the growth come from then? You've got this new war chest, $187 million raised in your listing this week. Where are you going to put that money to work to continue expanding?
Yes, so we're going to continue to do what we've been doing, right, which is really trying to get more new clients signing up every single day, as well as getting the existing clients to spend more on the platform, including cross-selling clients from one category to the other. What we see a lot is clients start by, let's say, hiring developers on Upwork, and then we get them to realize that we also have designers on the platform, and then progressively one thing leads to another, and they start spending across the 70 categories on the site, which ultimately is all about creating more jobs on the platform, because that is what we need more of in order to fulfill the the need for work that freelancers have on the site.
Lastly, you did say that this is an increasingly competitive market. You have the likes of LinkedIn, you have Google, Facebook, and of course there's Amazon, who tends to make competitors shake in their boots. Who are you most worried about, and what are you doing to be sure that some of these big tech giants aren't taking share from you in what seems to be an attractive space for a lot of these tech companies?
Yeah, well, I think the reason why investors have been really interested in the company is because of the strength of the competitive moats in this business. This is not an overnight success. This company has been around through the predecessor companies that merged together for almost 20 years. It takes a long, long time to build the network effects that are necessary to do this at scale. But once you get the spin wheel going, it feeds itself. So today, 100% of freelancers who sign up on Upwork do so through word of mouth. 80% of the business on the buyer side also comes through free channels, including word of mouth. And so the spin wheel at some point starts to really accelerate, and that is, those network effects are one of the main sources of really strong competitive moats, and we think it's going to be really hard for others to imitate. Obviously, we continue to innovate a lot. We spend a lot of money on research and development. By the way, we use freelancers a lot. There's 1,500 people who work at Upwork. 1,100 of them are freelancers. So we're able to attract really, really top talent from around the world to innovate and continue to push forward as we build this freelance economy.
That was Bloomberg's Alex Barinka with the CEO of Upwork, Stefan Casriel. Coming up, we return to our top story of the day, China's big hardware hack. Bloomberg reports a Chinese military unit designed and manufactured chips that were embedded in servers of almost 30 U.S. companies. More ahead. Plus, Jessica Powell may have headed Google Communications, but she wants to make clear her new book isn't a tell-all about the search giant. She talks about her new satirical look at Silicon Valley next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story. Chinese hackers infiltrating the data servers of dozens of American companies, including Amazon and Apple. The Chinese government didn't directly address the allegations, but said that China has also been a victim in cyberspace. The story has Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota calling for more offensive cyber capabilities from the United States. Take a listen to what he told Bloomberg earlier.
The Science Board for the Department of Defense has made it very clear that over the next 10 years, defensive capabilities alone aren't going to be enough. We're going to have some deterrence in order to slow down some of the cyber interference that is occurring.
Joining us now from New York, we have Isaac Stonefish, Senior Fellow at the Asia Society. And Isaac, are reporting 17 unnamed sources telling us this is true. What's your response to this? Does this surprise you, or is it not a surprise at all?
This is definitely a surprise, and I do commend the reporting on this story. It was an excellent story, very deeply reported, and I think where we are as a society in America is starting to wake up to all the different things that the Communist Party and its various arms have done to, perhaps meddle is too strong of a word, but to interfere in various American processes. And this is just a very detailed look at an example of where the party got very, very deep in disrupting the American supply chain.
Now, I do want to read the statements of the companies. Once again, it is untrue. Amazon saying that AWS knew about a supply chain compromise, an issue with malicious chips or hardware modifications when acquiring Elemental. This is the company that deployed the servers that had these chips embedded from Apple. On this, we can be very clear. Apple has never found malicious chips, hardware manipulations, or vulnerabilities purposely planted in any server. And Supermicro saying, we remain unaware of any such investigation. This is the company that Bloomberg is reporting made these servers. Now, take a listen to this statement from the Chinese government. Supply chain safety in cyberspace is an issue of common concern, and China is also a victim. So the Chinese government not denying it, not directly addressing the allegations. What do you make of that response from the Chinese government?
So it's interesting that the statement comes from the Foreign Ministry, which is one of the few bodies of the party that has a spokesperson that speaks somewhat regularly to the American press. So it is possible that the people in the Foreign Ministry don't have any idea of what the PLA, China's military, the party's military rather, was doing, and that they got instructions to address it this way, or they frankly just didn't know. Unfortunately, the PLA, the party military, does not have a spokesperson who speaks to international media, so there's no way for journalists and people on the outside to actually go in there and get the military's view on any of this. Even if we were able to, it's very likely that the military would not admit to having done such a complicated and devastating process.
Now, tensions between the U.S. and China are already high. We're in the middle of a trade war, and the Trump administration has expressed a lot of concern about, the national security concerns with respect to China. So how do you expect a story like this might up the ante or increase the level of tension that we're now seeing between the United States and China? So
with Vice President Pence's frankly astonishing speech today, which was the most critical by a president or vice president towards China in as long as I can remember, I think we really are at the perfect storm of all these different areas of U.S. society having things that, frankly, they feel that Beijing did wrong, ways that Beijing has wronged them. So I think we're going to see more reporting like this come out, because I think U.S. officials and people in the intelligence community are going to be more willing to talk about it. And I think we're going to see more of a response from government, from civil society, from academia about ways to constructively push back on China's influence in America. Now, I want to make it very clear, China's influence is not Chinese people's influence, and that neither myself or most of the people working on this support any sort of thing that would make it more difficult for Chinese students to study here, for example, and that this is really about the Communist Party and not about the Chinese people.
Are we going to see U.S. companies moving their supply chains outside of China?
I think we will. I think that is something that the Trump administration has long pushed for, and I think stories like this are good ammunition for the Trump administration to say, listen, besides the political win that we get by you moving production to America or possibly to other parts of the world, it's also a security win for you. And even though it's cheaper, even though it's easier to be manufacturing in China, you really got to bake in the risk.
All right, Isaac Stonefish of the Asia Society, thanks so much for weighing in. We should note that Bloomberg LP has been a Supermicro customer, but has found no evidence to suggest that Bloomberg has been affected by the hardware issues raised in this article. Well, Jessica Powell spent years of her tech career shaping the communication strategy at one of the world's biggest tech giants. That is Google. Now, the former Google VP describes herself as both a technophobe and a technophile. She's also the former CMO of the dating site Badoo. She serves now as CEO of a software startup for musicians and As much as she loves technology, she's also well aware of its flaws. In her new book, The Big Disruption, a totally fictional but essentially true Silicon Valley story, Powell gives a satirical take on tech from the perspective of an insider who both celebrates its achievements and is calling for change. The book is now out on Medium. It is the first full-length novel to be featured on the publishing platform, and Jessica Powell joins us now. So, why did you write this?
You know, I wanted to shed some critical light on what I see as a tech's hypocrisy. You know, we go about saying that we're building these amazing things and doing great things for the world, but we're also causing a lot of serious problems. So I wanted to approach that in a funny, approachable way that the people here would actually read.
Now, this is a satire, not to be confused with a tell-all. That said, you had a perch inside, you know, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. You decided to put your name on this, though you thought about writing it anonymously. Yeah. I mean, how did you weigh the risks and the benefits?
I mean, I would have loved to have done it anonymously. If you work in PR your whole life, you're usually behind the scenes. The idea of doing this right now is kind of terrifying. But at the end of the day, first, and I also didn't want anyone to think it was about a specific company. But I also realized at this time there are few senior people in tech that speak out on issues like this. A lot of times because they move to new companies or they're still on the payroll. So I thought it was important to put my name to it.
Now, as the New York Times says, not long ago, your job was to defend Silicon Valley. And when you look at the plot lines, the sales guys battling with the engineers, the female employees, the unwitting subjects of a wild social experiment, the VPs plotting against each other, and the yoga-loving, sex-obsessed CEO rumored to be planning a moon colony. You know, I know the Google co-founders love their Lululemon, but is this fiction or is this fictionalized?
I mean, it's inspired by Google as much as it is by the startups. I mean, I worked in a startup too, and also the other large companies. I mean, I feel pretty confident in saying that Larry Page is not a nymphomaniac CEO obsessed with the moon.
So, you know, talk to me about some of the themes here, because you're fairly prescient. I mean, there's sort of like a Me Too theme. You've got the misogynistic CEO, and you've got the woman who buys into the company entirely. How should we interpret that, given the diversity problems in Silicon Valley today?
I mean, I thought a lot about that. I went and eliminated pretty much any women or people of color, for that matter, from this book because I wanted to make a point, right, that we are dramatically underrepresented. And even when we are there, we often aren't given the same opportunities. And so the one female character in the book is a female receptionist with a PhD who basically saves the whole company with her invention. But by the end of the book, and I'm not giving much away here, she's back to being a receptionist.
I can't have you here without asking you about some of the challenges that Google is facing now. Number one, trying to get back into China. The public, many people don't seem happy with this. Some employees don't seem happy with this. The U.S. government doesn't seem happy with this. Is it the right call?
You know, I'm really torn on the China issue. On the one hand, I believe in moral imperatives. I think what Google did was really admirable. I felt really proud at the time. On the other hand, I think it's a fair question to ask, what tangible good did it do other than making us feel really good? In that censorship is worse in China, information access is worse in China. There's an argument to be made that more search competition, whether it's by Google or someone else, could actually, and potentially a company that might do less censorship, could actually be a really good thing for Chinese users. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt of seeing actually what they want to do and how they would plan to build in safeguards for Chinese users. I mean, I think the devil's really in the details.
Google did not take an opportunity to testify before Congress. Now they are sending Sundar Pichai. If you were working at Google, you would have been part of that decision. Was that a mistake?
I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the thought process was. But I think you've kind of answered the question in the sense that they didn't go, and now they have to go anyway. So, you know.
So when you say at times you felt you had to defend the indefensible, what do you think is indefensible today?
Well, I think across the industry, there's just a real problem that we have of kind of black and white thinking, that we lead so much with data all the time, which I think lends itself to a certain level of moral abstractionism. That you say, oh, well, you know, with 2 billion users, maybe a small percentage of that is bad actors. And when you look at that just like that, this tiny, tiny percentage, it's very easy to forget that that's actually thousands or millions, right? And that's electoral interference, that's live streamed suicides, that's Myanmar. I mean, it's really horrific stuff. But again, it gets abstracted to this data point where then it looks so small that you don't actually look at that in a really human way and think, how can we solve this the best way, not just how do we solve this with machines?
We're entering an era where tech is really unpopular. And you're right, it's not just Google. It's, Facebook just announcing 50 million accounts were hacked, not knowing the extent of it. Oh, and all of these companies that are tied into the Facebook login could also be affected as well. Do you think that this is the beginning of a prolonged era of tech hating? And if you were on the inside of Google, how would you be handling it?
Well, I think in terms of the question around what the cycle that we're in, absolutely. I don't think the Valley has enough interaction with the outside world. Instead, they build what they want and impose it on the outside world, and the outside world is increasingly getting angry about that power dynamic. So I think it's going to come to a head in some way. If I were at Google or any of the large companies, I would really want to have a heart-to-heart and some sort of level of self-interrogation around, are we always approaching, first of all, are we always asking ourselves at the very start what the potential unintended consequences of this? Like, if you build a platform for free speech, you're building a platform for free speech. Anyone can say anything, right? It's not just all roses and wonderful things. And so what does that mean? And second, I think the other thing I would do is say, the starting point in so many of these companies, whenever a problem arises, is let's solve it with machines. Or you tell everyone, we're going to solve it with AI. Well, the truth is AI may solve these problems one day, but it doesn't do a great job today. And so just throwing your hands up in front of regulators and saying, well, the machines will get there at some point, it's a pretty unsatisfactory answer.
Why Medium, and what does that say about the traditional publishing industry?
I mean, I thought it was pretty appropriate that a book about tech would be on a tech platform. I loved that it was free. It's a free book for anyone. You can use it you can read it on your e-reader. I loved that it was globally accessible immediately, and there was none of the traditional publishing turnaround times, which just made it a pretty exciting opportunity.
All right, Jessica Powell, former Vice President of Global Communications and Public Affairs at Google, also now an author. You can check it out on Medium, The Big Disruption. Jessica, great to have you.
Great, thanks for having me.
Coming up, the sustainable benefits of vertical farming are undeniable, but what does the new tech mean for farm laborers? We take a look at how sustainable tech is changing tomorrow's jobs. This is Bloomberg. By 2050, the global population is expected to grow to 9.8 billion, and sustainable food production is needed now more than ever. Well, indoor farms can transform industrial arable land into crop caches using less space, water, and pesticides. But what does vertical farming mean for laborers? Bloomberg's Aki Ito investigates.
It might look like we're inside a spaceship, but this is actually a farm. The crops here are grown mostly by machines, with the help of just a few humans, like this woman. Her life offers an early peek at a new kind of farming. It's a promising twist to an ancient career, but only if the robots don't replace her altogether.
My name is Katie Morich, and I'm a vertical farmer.
Katie works for a 3-year-old startup called Bowery. Its farm is here, in this industrial park in New Jersey.
How are you?
It's the last place you'd expect to find any sign of life. Step inside, and you'll see a cross between a factory and a lab. Trays of produce are vertically stacked to save space, and each of them is given just the right amount of light, water, and nutrients at the optimal temperature and humidity. It's an incredible level of precision, which is why Katie can grow more faster with less water and no pesticides.
What's this? This is the sorrel. That tastes like candy apple.
Whoa! It's so sour.
I know.
The majority of this facility is automated. The data is collected by sensors, and a computer controls growing conditions for the crops. For the things that the machines can't do yet, Katie and her fellow human farmers fill in. And even those tasks are dictated by the software that runs this whole operation.
It lets me know what I have to do, what time I should be doing it by, and that's how I get my day done.
After a full day at the farm, Katie likes to bring home samples to her husband, Jace, and her cat, Burton. On the menu are 2 items from Katie's farm: basil for pesto pasta,
That's so good.
and mixed greens for a salad.
I'm terrified. Everyone's judging. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Cheers.
Katie fell in love with environmental science in college, but after graduating, she struggled to find a full-time career in the field.
Jace had to deal with me a lot. You know, coming home to me crying and trying to figure out if I'm making the right decisions. And then somehow online Bowery popped up.
She told me about this job, like Bowery farming. It's like an indoor vertical farm, and I was like, all right, this sounds like total BS. So I took my work truck and I said, you know what, let me swing around and see what this is all about. So I drove up to it. Doesn't look like there's a farm in there at all.
But I figured I'd go and check it out for myself. And I pulled up and it was exactly as how he described, but I gave it a shot.
And so in 2017, Katie joined Bowery. She became employee number 9. Bowery is backed by some of Silicon Valley's top investors. And with almost $30 million of funding, the startup is expanding fast. And in May, Katie got promoted to lead a team of her own farmers. The world's population is set to reach 9.8 billion people by 2050. 2/3 will live in cities. And we're gonna need all kinds of new technology to sustainably feed everyone. The key to making that food affordable is to continue to make more with fewer farmers. But no matter how high-tech all this gets, Katie thinks there will still be a place for her.
I just think there's something about the human mind that you can't really replicate. So I think we can still work closely with technology, but I still think it's nice, you know, to have a human there. It's also be pretty lonely for the robots if they don't have anybody to talk to.
That was Bloomberg's Aki Ito at Bowery Farms. Coming up, online education platform Duolingo is the most popular way to learn languages online, and now it's making money. We'll talk to the CEO next. This is Bloomberg. If you want to learn a language online, you probably use Duolingo, now with over 300 million users worldwide. It's the most downloaded education app on iTunes and Google Play, and was chosen by Apple as iPhone App of the Year. Here to discuss, Duolingo CEO Luis van Aan. Luis, it's designed to make education feel more like a game, but it is free. Can a free education app be a sustainable business?
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. We think it can. I mean, this is what we've been working on for the last few years. Duolingo started as a pretty highly mission-based company. We wanted to make free language education for the world. But at some point, you know, as a startup, as a for-profit company, we had to start monetizing. Over the last couple of years, what we did is at the end of every lesson, we actually put an ad. We have enough users that has generated tens of millions of dollars for us. And in addition to that, there's a subscription, which mainly is just for turning off the ads and also having access to Duolingo offline. And that has actually given us even more money. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we're now in the top 3 top grossing apps in education, even though all our content is free. So that's something that we're pretty proud of.
So what sets you apart from competition like Rosetta Stone and the like?
There's a couple of things. I think the first one is that it was really a mobile first. It was an app, whereas when we launched, Rosetta Stone was mainly for PCs. We also are gamified, so we realized early on that the main thing, the hardest thing to learn a language by yourself is to keep yourself motivated. So we decided to make Duolingo as addictive as possible. So basically, you get addicted to learning a language. I think that's one of the biggest things. And the third one is that it's free for the majority of the users. I mean, you usually, if you don't mind seeing ads, it's completely free as opposed to having to pay hundreds of dollars to use it.
Right. Now, the fascinating thing about EdTech is that there's never been a multi-billion-dollar EdTech company. Do you think that will be you? Would you be open to selling to a big tech giant, or do you plan to go it alone?
Our plan is to go it alone. We really think we can do it. Our goal is to IPO. I mean, this is not going to happen this year yet, but we're on track for we'll probably be ready. I don't know if we'll be able to do it. Depending on market conditions, we'll probably be ready in a couple of years. By just looking at our revenue growth.
And do you get to that multi-billion-dollar mark?
I think so. I think we'll be able to do it.
How high?
Well, I mean, that's good. That's it's hard to say. But I think we can be a $10 billion business. Language learning in the world is people spend about $80 billion a year learning a language. We're the most popular way to learn a language in the world, so we should be able to capture some of that value.
All right. Well, that's some confidence. Luis Fanon, Duolingo CEO, will be tracking to see if you get to that $10 billion milestone. Thank you.
Thank you.
That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Did you ask Danielle? I think I'm going to take this off for this. Hang on one second, please. Yep.
Yeah, it's a little glare.